Good evening all and welcome. I'd just like to say to everyone listening now, thank you so much for listening and choosing and sticking around. It really means a lot. I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. I've put a lot of work into this one and I hope that you like it. But with that being said, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I graduated college, I moved back home into that weird post-grad limbo and tried to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. In the meantime, I wanted one last summer of procrastination before I jumped into the real world. So I asked my friend to hook me up with a job at a local movie theater. He had worked there for a couple of summers during school as a morning cleaner, running a shift from 4 to 10 a.m. every morning. It wasn't a great job, but it paid more than minimum wage, which was quite hard to come by in a town oversaturated with college kids. I interviewed and got the job when I was highly recommended by my friend. The guy who interviewed me would be also my manager, a scruffy guy called Jeff. He smoked like a chimney and made tank tops and cut-off jeans a solid part of wardrobe. He also looked like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in years, but that could have also been all the hard drinking he did every night. I remember he asked me the typical questions, if I was okay with working strange hours, cleaning up vomit, etc. I had worked in fast food as a teenager, so none of that stuff had bothered me. What struck me as odd was the last question he asked. Do you scare easy? I laughed it off and said no. He shrugged and said, well, some new hires get kinda spooked by the big building at night. You know how it's a big building, it makes all kind of noises. Made sense to me. I have a very active imagination, but I had a hard time being scared in a movie theater of all places. I started my job the very next day. For the first few weeks, everything was pretty normal. The job was actually pretty easy, all things considered. Throw this away, mop that, scrub this, wipe that, take out the garbage. You're by yourself for the majority of the shift, so we're allowed to bring our iPods with us. The theatre was fairly large. Its layout was shaped like a T, with the lobby and bathrooms in the stem, the smaller theatres on the left and the larger IMAX screens on the right. Running above the theatre hallway was the projection area, an equally long hallway with a couple of small offices and all the projector equipment. If you were the first to arrive in the morning, you had to go up a winding staircase and turn on the lights in all the theatres. It wasn't a big deal, except with all the lights off, the building can be, just as Jeff described it, a little creepy. The projector area was full of promotional materials, including a sea of cardboard cutouts from all the movies that have played in the theatre. Sometimes the theatre manager would have giveaways and the staff could take home some of the items. Pretty cool, but when the lights were off, it looked like a sea of people in the hallway. Another part of our job was to meet with the day crew after our shift at 10 a.m. and go over any maintenance problems we were dealing with, and they could highlight anything we needed to address on our next shift. The second thing to strike me as odd was the day manager Bob pulling me aside after my shift. "You're the new guy, right?" he asked. "Yeah." He thrust a pair of keys into my hand. "Can you make sure this place is locked up at night? I know you guys are usually in the back or upstairs. I don't want anyone sneaking in while you're occupied." I asked him if there was a problem. He looked a little flustered and went on to explain that customers, primarily women, were complaining about a tall, lanky man in a suit who had been following them from theatre to theatre, sometimes in the bathroom. The last several months, several frightened women had come to the front desk, describing a 7-foot-tall man in a black suit, complete with a bowler cap, walking slowly after them. A few times even the police were called. Teenagers that worked the day shift referred to him as the tall man, While he primarily targeted women, occasionally a male co-worker would catch a glimpse of him sneaking into a theater. On a couple of occasions they would pursue, thinking it was someone trying to sneak into a movie, only to find nobody there. We had 12 theater rooms in total, but Theater 5 was the worst. No one wanted to clean it out. When I first started, I was fairly naive about what was going on and didn't understand why Jeff was apprehensive about Theater 5 and kept assigning me to clean it out. What made Theater 5 unique was that it sat behind the bathrooms in the lobby. So you get to the sitting area, you had to walk down a long hallway before reaching the screening room. Being that far back, you were in the most secluded part, especially when it's 4 AM and the only other people you are with are on the other side of the building. People cleaning there would complain of nosebleeds, constant headaches, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Theater 5 always gave me an uneasy feeling as well, like I was being watched. On multiple occasions I would take my earbuds out and shout, "Hello," into the empty movie theater. Of course there would be no response, and I would shake it off and just go back to my normal routine. Well, one day I was sweeping the garbage from under the seats when I heard footsteps, someone running. I look down at the front of the theater, and I catch a glimpse of a little blonde-haired boy turning the corner into the long hallway. Immediately, I threw down my broom and chased after him. I ran down the hallway, out into the lobby where the kid had disappeared. I walked further into the lobby and saw my boss outside the front entrance, on a smoke break. "Who was that kid?" I asked. Jeff looked at me. For a moment he was confused, but then laughed, and I'll never forget how he said it. "Oh, so you met Charlie?" Charlie was another entity customers complained about. On several occasions they claimed a little blonde-haired boy was running up and down the aisles in the theater, causing all kinds of noise and ruckus during the movie. Of course, it was in Theater 5. When an usher would come to apprehend the child, he'd be gone. The female staff affectionately named him Charlie, after his resemblance to the character in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie was also responsible for knocking several cans of garbage over, throwing papers around, misplacing things, and making our janitorial duties a pain in the ass. Charlie wasn't frightening, just more of a nuisance than anything. We used to theorize that he was the son of the tall man, but the two were never seen together. It took that experience for Jeff to admit that some people had seen and heard things, which was his way of saying the theater was haunted. I found it odd considering the theater was relatively new. It was built in the 90s on some wetlands. According to some people that lived in the area, the property was owned by a family who sold it off back in the 1980s. There was no evidence of foul play. It wasn't an Indian burial ground. It was just a weird place where strange things happened. I didn't even realize there was a basement level until my 3rd or 4th week. The basement, as I was told, was primarily used for storage. I'd give a better description, but that's as much as I know. Considering the one time I was asked to go down to the basement, I didn't even know where the hell it was. It was a Thursday, and I was ready to get out of there. I remember that I had the next few days off, and I was ready to just relax a little bit when I got home. I still had plenty of time on my shift, but this particular morning I was really dragging ass. Jeff gave me a few bags and told me to drop them off in the basement. I said I didn't know where that was, and he pointed down the hall. "Last door on the left, marked employees only," he replied. So I began walking away when he stopped me. "Don't go down there by yourself," he added with a bit of hesitation. "There's a lot of stuff down there. I don't want you tripping over anything." There were usually only 3 of us working a shift. This morning it was Jeff, myself, and a co-worker named Trevor. He was on the other side of the building cleaning out a theater. I could even hear his leaf blower running. Yes, we use leaf blowers to blow the popcorn out of the theater. and I didn't want to bother Jeff walking all the way across the building to grab him for him to babysit me going down some stairs to the basement. I figure I'm an adult, and I can drop a few bags into a room for Christ's sake. Jeff walks out of the lobby to have a smoke, and Trevor is down at the other end of the building. I'm by myself, at the far end of a dark hallway. I open the door, and I'm looking at a long staircase that drops into pure darkness. I flip the light switch to my left, and there's a light at the bottom of the staircase. It's gently flickering. Of course it's flickering. No one ever went down there to fix it. I heard the door open from the lobby. Jeff hadn't returned. I'm just hearing things. I look back down the staircase. I'm about to descend, when I hear a low, raspy voice from the bottom of the steps. "Hey." I pause. "Come here," it says again. There's a shadow bleeding from the bottom of the staircase. I can't tell what it is, but it's definitely a person. "Hello?" I call down. I don't know why I did that. I'm the only person on this side of the building. I know that there isn't just some person hiding out in a dark basement. At this point, my heart is pounding, and I'm starting to sweat, because I know it isn't normal, and I'm experiencing something that shouldn't happen. "You gotta come see this. Come have a look." The voice was a little louder. It sounded scratchy, like someone with a cold. The shadow was bleeding further into the bottom of the steps. Whatever was down there was coming closer. I tossed the bags down the steps, turned off the light, and walked back into the lobby. Jeff is walking back inside, reeking of cigarettes. I tell him what happened, and he has a look on his face that tells me it isn't the first time something like this has occurred. Upon reflection, he almost looked irritated when I told him I was going down by myself. "Nothing here's gonna hurt you," he says finally. I will never not be shocked at how casual he was about this whole thing. I think I was more taken aback by Jeff's reaction than I was by the actual incident. Later on, I told Trevor about what happened, and we went back down the steps to investigate. When I turned on the flickering light, the bags I had thrown down were gone. Theatre 5 had its instances, and the basement was particularly scary, but nothing was quite as bad as my experience with the projector area. Around 6 a.m., we would take a 30-minute break. Jeff and Trevor would usually go to McDonald's to eat, but it was always too early for me, so I'd lay in the hall and listen to my iPod. No matter how loud I turned up my music, though, I could never cancel out the sound of the footsteps from the projector area. It sounded like a 300-pound linebacker sprinting back and forth. Heavy, loud thumps up and down the hall above me. I told Jeff about it once, and he remarked that it was just the building settling, and there was a lot of equipment upstairs that made all sorts of noise. Jeff wasn't the smartest guy, but that didn't stop him from insulting anyone else's intelligence. Maybe he was trying to keep me from quitting. The turnover rate was pretty intense as a theatre for cleaning staff, and the creepiness was a big factor. The pay was garbage too, but that's another story. So it wasn't before long that I started feeling apprehensive about going upstairs to check the projectors and turn on the lights in the theatres below. On one particular occasion, I was walking up the steps to the hallway when I heard what sounded like a child call my name from the bottom of the steps. I knew it was Charlie because, well, how many children are in the theatre at 4 a.m? That was the first instance of me hearing my name. For a week straight, I hear voices echoing down the hallway from the projector room, Theatre 5 or down the hall. That was easy to ignore once I put my iPod on, but it never shook the feeling of being watched. I had never seen the tall man in person. I had only ever had instances where I encountered Charlie, heard noises, or saw shadows. My only experience was at the start of my shift, when I was the first to arrive at work. If you're first, it's your job to go upstairs and turn on the theatre lights in the projector hall. I wasn't happy about it, but it looked like it was going to be another morning where Jeff and Trevor were late, and I didn't want to muck around on my shift and wait. Since the projector area is dark, we would typically carry a flashlight with us while going around flipping switches. That morning, I couldn't find the flashlight, which we would later find in a garbage can. Thanks, Charlie. So I walked through the dark hallway of projectors, flipping all the switches. I had stayed up all night prior watching the Andy Griffith Show, and I remember because I was whistling the theme song to myself as I walked down the corridor. Once again, I got that feeling of being watched, and something several yards away in the area of the projectors, overlooking the IMAX theater room, was staring back at me. I stopped whistling and tried to focus my eyes. It was a cardboard cutout. They were everywhere, so I kind of dismissed it. As I was about to flip the next switch, the cutout moved. I froze. What I thought was a cutout was actually a figure hunched over. It was quietly whistling the Andy Griffith theme song, imitating me, only whistling slowly. It rose up from its crouch, revealing itself to be at least 7 feet tall. It was a man. All I could see was a silhouette against the red exit sign lights and some of the projector computer monitors. It started towards me, whistling quietly. I wanted to move, but for some reason my feet were cemented in the spot, and I had cotton for a tongue. I didn't know what to do. Slowly the tall man stepped towards me. He walked with a bit of a waddle, as he had a limp leg on his left. I couldn't exactly tell. He had taken about 3 or 4 steps towards me when something caught his attention and he turned and walked into an office down the hall. I turned back and ran down the steps and waited outside the theater until my boss and the rest of the crew arrived. I told them what happened, and they explained to me that the tall man existed but didn't and wasn't going to hurt me. I didn't care. I put in my 2 weeks and have never looked back. This happened around 25 years ago. But during rehearsals for Chess, the cast was taking a break and eating some pizza in the auditorium seating area. Everyone in the building was in the first few rows of seats eating and talking, except a little girl who was about 4 wandering around the stage. The little girl fell through a trapdoor in the stage that hadn't been closed. From the stage, it's a 14 to 15 foot drop to the concrete below. Of course, everyone immediately bolts backstage, some going straight, right, some going left. At a full run, it only takes about 15 to 20 seconds at most to get backstage to the stairs. When they went down the stairs, they found the little girl completely unharmed, staring up at the trapdoor. When asked what happened, all the little girl would say is, "The nice man caught me." Everyone did a search of the building, but the back door was locked from the inside and there was no one under the stage, where they kept all the old costumes or dressing rooms, and there was no way to get in and out, except through the ways we came in. Other things that happened in the theatre are less dramatic. During a production of A Few Good Men, about half a dozen much-needed costumes appeared out of nowhere with no explanation. Lights turned themselves on and off, normal ghost stuff. The original Boise Little Theatre burned down, and 2 people actually didn't make it out of the fire. Sad times. So some cast members believed the ghosts somehow followed the troupe to the new location. Honestly, I don't know, but I do know that a nice man who was never seen by anyone saved a little girl from a fall that very well could have killed her. I was an intern for a theatre in Glendale that used to be a Mason temple. It was 7 stories, with a lower level that used to be a restaurant nightclub in the 1930s. It had gutted restaurant seats. The second floor used to be an old movie room. On the bottom level was a prop cage that the theatre had built that contained thousands of props, like tea sets, spoons, and other stuff, since a classical theatre company ran the theatre and they performed Shakespeare, Molière, and Dickens. One night, I was working late with the tech director in a room adjacent to the prop cage right by the staircase that led up to one of the main rooms of the theatre, when I heard props moving. It sounded like cups were knocking each other or clinking, like they were rolling on the floor. The tech director went to investigate and saw nothing. When he left the room, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, although the theater was empty. The tech director returned, and we checked the stairs, but nobody was there. I told him it was a ghost, and he laughed and said there were no such things. When suddenly we both heard loud footsteps stomping down the stairs, crazy loud and very threatening. We looked at each other, and then something truly weird happened that I will never forget. Someone stomped on the floor above us and scratched the side of the walls, but inside the walls, as if they were scratching the pipes. And then we heard a long bong noise, as if someone had flicked a door stopper, almost like a cartoon bong, all at the same time. The tech director and I stared at each other in shock, and then we got the hell out of there. We couldn't believe what happened. We heard stories about footsteps and other actors seeing ghosts, but this was truly bizarre. What kind of ghost stomps on the ceiling, scratches the pipes and the walls, and makes a loud bong noise? The bong noise sounded like a rubber stopper being flicked, like a sound effect you may hear in a cartoon. We had to return a few days later to finish working, and the moment we were alone in there, it started stomping in the room above, but more like someone was walking around, although the theater was empty again, since it was Christmas break and no one was there. We used the key to let ourselves inside, and then the tech director called to it again, making fun of it, like he had done so before, when suddenly I felt fear from the ghost or whatever the thing was that was in the room with us. It was afraid. It scratched the walls again, but I knew that it was the one scared, and we left again. Months later, a group of us closed the theater after a show on the 3rd floor. We turned off all the lights and locked the doors. We stood outside talking about our show when we heard books dropping on the 2nd floor. We were standing under the window of the 2nd floor, and we all heard large books being dropped. An entire group of people heard it. That was my last encounter with the ghost in that building, although I heard other stories from the actors there. One actress told me that she locked up one night and heard a bell ringing in another room, and she quietly walked down the stairs from the 3rd floor to the main floor, with the bell noise getting louder and louder until it was ringing right behind her ear, but no one was there. She turned around and yelled at a ghost to stop scaring her on the main floor and ran out. She wouldn't be alone in the building ever again, and told us that she'd seen hangers fly across the room in the middle of a stage performance, and the 2 other actors were standing with her in the wings waiting to go on, when they saw all the hangers from the costume rack fly across the room. She and another actor claimed to have seen an old man ghost during stage performances suddenly materialize on stage or in the wings, but no one in the audience could see him. An actor said he exited a scene and had to walk through this ghost, and when he returned to the stage, he was white because he was terrified. I never saw the ghost though, but I heard one. When my internship was over, I never returned to the theater. But I saw the technical director many years later, who eventually quit. He said that when he worked late building sets, he would hear his tools moving, or if he was sawing wood, he would hear something moving in another room, and when he would inspect, nothing would be there. He quit eventually. I don't blame him. I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts, but I still can't explain what happened to the technical director. And that night, no one was in the building. And if there was, how could one person stomp down the stairs, then stomp on the ceiling, scratch the pipes alongside the wall, the side wall, and make that spring sound that went bong? Super weird stuff. A few years back, I was covering weekend shifts at a movie theater on the north side of Pueblo, Colorado. I don't remember the year, just that Hotel Transylvania 2 and a Tom Hanks spy movie were playing. I was armed security down there because the theater tended to see a large number of customers, and sadly those guests would smoke weed in the bathrooms, get into fistfights, and sneak into other theaters. So it was regularly a long shift. The shifts tended to be 5 p.m. to 2:30 a.m., when the last show got out for the night. I don't know any history of the theatre, but right around October, odd occurrences began to spark up past 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday nights. Usually, most kid and family movies didn't go past 10:45, so I only had teenagers and adults to contend with. One Saturday night, close to Halloween, events started to happen very frequently. Around 11, after some movies started their last showing, the assistant manager and I were walking the hallways and checking empty theatres. She was a young student at a university not far from the theatre, very mature and straight-faced. While we were in the empty theatre that just let out, we began seeing light flashes, but not like the lights from the walkway or overhead, more like flashlight, but an older, dimmer one. We couldn't find the origin of the light, so we thought it was a technician that would check on the reels and projection devices. After leaving the theatre and checking on a smaller concession stand, I was leaning over the counter as she was collecting the money from the register, placing the cash in a bank bag. While standing there just talking about pointless junk, the soda machine started spraying from 3 of the 8 spouts. The assistant manager yelped and literally jumped backwards. Frazzled, she grabbed the bank bag and declared that she was returning to the main office. I continued checking active theatres to ensure no one was conducting themselves inappropriately, and to my pleasant surprise, no one was doing anything that warranted me to get involved. I shortly after returned to the main lobby, where a few employees remained, all doing some end-of-the-night cleaning task. I waited for the second to last showing of the night to let out, and decided to hang out in the little arcade to kill time, sitting on a chair next to the Time Crisis 3 machine. I was mindlessly scrolling Facebook, regularly checking my watch to see if the movie was about to end, when a basketball shooting hoops game siren belted out and flashed. The assistant manager walked in and jokingly said, "Hit the high score?" I looked at her and then looked at the game. "I've been sitting here for 25 minutes. She then told me that the siren only goes off when someone gets over a certain amount of points, but should not have soundlessly played itself. "There hasn't been anyone in here with me at all," I say. Going pale, she stated that she was going on her last break for the night and left out the side service store to have a cigarette. Finally, after 2 hours from what happened in the arcade, the final movie of the night was getting out. I stood by the main exit thanking people and telling them to have a good night. Just before the last group of people who staggered after using the restrooms left, the technician up in the projection hallway called for the assistant manager, stating that an issue had just started. I walked to the theatre that the assistant manager was standing in, which was across the hallway from the last movie that was just let out. "Apparently the system hates us," she asserted. I replied with, "So what's going on?" The technician joined us in the theatre. A movie was starting and stopping the same 30-second scene, and it was skipping and restarting like a song on a scratched CD. Because of this weird defect, the assistant manager released the regular staff and ushers for the night, but her, the technician, and I stayed a while longer. The technician was able to stop and fix the issue, but I could tell he didn't even know how it started. Now the 3 of us were finally leaving, and it was just before 3 a.m. As the assistant manager was setting the alarm, the basketball arcade game high score siren went off again. The technician and I went over to see if maybe someone hid in the arcade, but neither of us could find anyone. But I remember standing in that little arcade, looking around at how unusually cold it had become. Again, this was October in Colorado, so being cold is 50-50, but this felt like a blast of air conditioning. After 10 minutes of not finding anything, we all left with no further incident. I to this day don't know if it was all an odd occurrence or paranormal, but I have a feeling a playful poltergeist made themselves known that night. My mother was an actress for decades. From a very young age, I have been in and out of many theatres. I was in on all the superstitions and behind-the-scenes stories that honestly were frightening. but I couldn't help but listen to what the cast and crew had to say, and as you can imagine, theatre people have a way of telling stories. Of course, I had some experiences of my own, cold spots, the feeling of being watched, and disembodied footsteps or voices, but I just chalked it up to being a kid with an overactive imagination. But knowing what I know now, I wonder if it was my imagination. Following in my mum's footsteps, I began my own artistic ventures at the age of 7. I'm in high school now, and have been acting for a decade as of this year. Throughout my career, I have been in hundreds of productions and in and out of countless venues. This particular instance, I was in rehearsals for a school production on an off-campus venue. The building's nickname was Wendy. I know it's not exactly a striking or chilling name, but it does personify the building in a way other theatres around town can't. It made a name for itself, one of the reasons why can be attributed to the fact that many in my city, particularly among theatre folk, consider the theatre to be alive, in a way, although the entities that haunt it are very much dead. As I grew older, my interests in the paranormal grew, and it has been a fun thing to learn about. Growing up around these stories and places definitely made me more curious. This particular day of rehearsals, me and a few friends decided to ask our director if anything strange had happened recently. It was January, the start of a new year, and this was just before our lunch break, and we had finished up all of our work for the morning. Our director sighed and said we would think he was making something up or straight up going crazy, but we insisted we would believe him. And he told us his experience took place that December, locking up the theatre after the closing of the Christmas show, and the only 2 people left in the theatre were himself and another member of cast. And he was walking out of the green room. He heard an ear-splitting cackle that sounded like a classic stereotypical witch, crystal clear. It sounded like it came from someone standing right behind him. When he rolled around to find no one, he went on in search of the other cast member who was in the office down the hall from the green room. He asked what was so funny to make him laugh like that. The cast member looked confused and had explained he hadn't laughed. No one else was in the theatre, and he didn't hear anything anyway. It's been quiet since. After our director had told us the story, he excused himself to go out for lunch, instructing the cast not to leave a mess in the lobby and not to go into the theatre without an adult. Obviously, me and my friends decided to go in. After we made sure he was gone, we snuck up the stairs. The doors were unlocked, as we expected them to be, and we stepped inside. Since the theatre wasn't in use, all of the lights were off, except for the ghost light in the middle of the stage. It was incredibly eerie. The theatre holds up to 1,000 people. The tiny light was not big enough to brighten the entirety of the auditorium, instead casting strange shadows across the audience. The 3 of us stuck side by side, too scared to walk down the steps towards the stage as the door shut behind us, when it became even darker. We looked around for a bit from our perch on the steps, and eventually began debating whether or not to go into the green room. We talked about our director's story for 5 minutes, and then there was this weird lull in the conversation. The air got tense and heavy. Each of us just stared at each other. The hair on my neck stood up. Then, from the green room across the stage and the rows and rows of seats, we heard it. A loud, bone-chilling cackle. I can't even begin to describe the feeling I had after hearing that absolutely horrid laugh. It was evil, high-pitched like a woman's laughter, and truly terrifying. After it had registered what we all heard, we stood there in fear, eyes wide, before I broke the silence. "Did you hear that?" "You mean the cackle?" my friend said. We all heard it. Once it was confirmed that we'd all experienced the same thing and that we weren't individually going insane, we bolted out of the theatre. The realization that whatever it was had been listening, waiting for the perfect moment to taunt us, still haunts me to this day, and it's been all quiet ever since. I was working the night shift / closing shift in a cinema. Although the cinema was and still is shiny, inviting, and alluring, when people visit, I don't think they recall that the building was once a morgue for the bodies of people that were hanged just a few yards away. One night during closing, myself and around several other staff members did our normal screen, bathroom, and confectionery checks to make sure all guests had exited. Each screen has nighttime CCTV, so it was pretty easy to spot anyone that was left behind. We were closing the main doors, and just as we were doing so, we heard a guest bathroom door give a long creak as if someone was pushing it open slowly. We all look at each other, assuming there was a guest in there, so myself and another staff member went to check it out. When we walked into the ladies' bathroom, all the loo doors were shut, bar the one at the very end, which was wide open. We checked it out, and no one was there. We called building security to check the place out, and it was confirmed there was no one. Very strange and uncomfortable. Many things happened in that place that were all very creepy. I work in a very old cinema dating back to the 1930s. Ever since I started, I've heard stories of it being haunted. I've heard a few claims of people hearing doors being slammed when no one's in the building, that kind of stuff, as well as people who have seen figures roaming around the building freely. I mean, I thought I saw something once, but I'm not sure what to think of it. I know my old manager. He said he was going to check a screen before closing the building. As he was now approaching, the screen doors flew open and he heard a voice say, "Go away." Now, I know him, and he doesn't seem the type to lie, nor believe in stuff like this. Another claim from my colleague is that when they were cleaning a screen, they saw a woman sat in a chair and she said, "Shh," and then they ran out the room screaming. I mean, I've seen stuff move there, but that doesn't really creep me out. What does creep me out is that behind one of our screens are a bunch of rooms, which are old and not used, but they creep the hell out of me. I'm not saying I'm scared or anything, I'm just telling you this story to see what you make of it. I go to a small liberal arts school in the Midwest, which used to be an orphanage, then an all-girls school, and is now a university. I'm a theatre major, and spend lots of time in my theatre. The space we use used to be the school's chapel, which they then turned into our space. It is said that a former student hung herself in the pool showers that are now under the chapel, now theatre, and now haunts the space. I've actually seen her a few times and spoken to others who have as well. They've all said they've seen her in similar circumstances. From my experience and others, she's not a problem, she's just there. However, there is a second entity who I've witnessed twice and hope to never see again. He appears as a black figure, and when you see him, it fills you with this awful feeling of emptiness. Others have seen him too, and recount the same feeling. It's weird even typing that feeling down. At this point, I just want answers, so me and fellow majors have thought about doing a Ouija board in front of the building. I wonder if that's a good idea. We really just want to know what's going on with this apparition. When I was in high school, my senior year, I was helping out with school plays. A girl I liked was in the play and asked if I could help, so of course I said yes. Well. One night after rehearsals had concluded, I stayed back in order to organize the prop room. Had major OCD back then. A few minutes go by and I hear the door to the stage slam shut. Something to note about this door is that if you closed it without propping it open, you'd surely lock yourself in and be screwed. So being the nice guy that I was, I walk over, prop the door open and step inside, and I can already hear my Mexican ancestors calling me all kinds of swear words for going towards the noise. I walk onto the stage and start calling out, "Anyone here? Everyone already left? You know you nearly knocked yourself in here, right?" It was silent except for the booming of my steps. I didn't just hear the booming, but I felt them through my shoes and it shook me. I thought nothing of it, and kept asking who was still around, but no one replied. Then I started hearing what sounded like someone running up and down the aisles. After a while, the spotlights started making noise as though someone was playing with them. At that point I figured my friend Amy was messing with me, so I texted her and asked her if she was playing with me. She said no, and she FaceTimed me. She showed me she was in her bedroom. I apologized and said we would talk the next day and hung up. After what felt like an eternity, the spotlight stopped, the running in the aisles ceased, but the stomping on the stage didn't, which I thought was myself up until before. They felt closer and closer, up until they stomped right behind me. And I felt a breeze on my neck, and thought, okay, it has to be the wind. Then I felt 3 sharp nails land on my shoulder one at a time. That was the last straw, and I bolted out of there, running the fastest I had in my life. I grabbed my backpack and got out. Before I start, I'd like to mention that I am not unfamiliar with the paranormal. I've experienced whispers, shadow figures, sudden senses being triggered, etc., and the only thing I haven't experienced is actually physically seeing a spirit. This leads me to my story. I work in a movie theatre, so late nights are a normal thing. My co-workers are all pretty colourful people that tend to joke a lot, but almost all of us have one thing in common. We feel something off in one of the theatres. I first noticed it in the first month I worked there, and at first it only felt like a mild discomfort, but as time went by, especially in February, the feeling only intensified. For clarification, it feels like something is constantly watching us with this intense malice, like we shouldn't be there and it wants us to know it. I dealt with this intense feeling by walking in and telling it that I was just getting in to do my job and that I would be out of there in a few minutes. For a short time it actually stopped, until February. In February of 2020 I was working late, making sure the bar glasses were collected, and it came to the time of the night where I had to go to this particular theatre. I walked in and immediately the feeling started up, with far more malice than I was expecting. I gave it my usual spiel about getting out of there quick, but the feeling just intensified. I didn't find what I was looking for, so I decided to hightail it out of there, which usually helps, but this time it decided to follow me. I was moving at a near sprint, then the feeling went from somewhere in the middle of the screen to directly behind me. It stayed at my back the whole time as I ran out the theatre and into the next before just disappearing. Now the little silhouettes I see in the dark in my apartment have begun to increase in sighting, and I'm not sure what it is. If anyone has any answers for me, they would be greatly appreciated. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I say that all the time, but I really do mean that. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you that sticks around and chooses to listen to me. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. You mean the world to me. This channel would be nothing without the likes of you actually listening. But yeah, I'm just really grateful. Thank you, everyone. If you enjoyed tonight's video, you know that leaving a like and a comment, subscribing, and all of the good stuff really does help me out. And it does. And I'm really trying harder to answer all the comments. So yeah, I'm really trying. I think I answered the last 2 videos, comments, and I'm going to start answering them on a daily basis. Little 15 minutes a day kind of thing. Just because so I can get interaction with all of you guys. I miss talking with you. So thank you. As always, a huge thank you to my members and subscribers whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for helping me out. Much love to you all. Seriously. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.